when I got to college, I kind of went down the Division I track and field and cross country route, and then Jimmy went the wrestling route, and then we kind of reconverged after that with discovering CrossFit, and that kind of led us onto this journey of health and wellness and optimization and all of that stuff. So our podcast is a lot about optimization. We talk to wrestling coaches, we talk to people like yourself in the space. We've also done some stuff in the psychedelic world and some people in that realm. We've had authors, we've had filmmakers, pretty much anything that interests us. We look at this as a way to have a cool conversation and kind of get our own little master class for ourselves, but then also for our audience and stuff like that. So we're both originally from New Jersey. Jimmy lives in Florida now, and I live in South Carolina. And before that, we were both living together in Colorado.
Very cool. I wanted to be here with you guys. I think it's really cool that you guys can do this as brothers. I have four brothers of my own, and yeah, tip of the hat that you guys have decided to do this, and it sounds like you've worked together for many years. So, yeah, grateful to be here, and thank you for the offer.
Yeah, we work pretty well together. We've been in three fist fights in the last 10 years, and it's been against one another. So
That's pretty good. If you ask me, anybody else that doesn't have siblings would be like, "Oh, it's terrible." I think that's remarkable.
the last one was in the mean streets of Denver, Colorado, where we were literally in the middle of the street after the outdoor retailer show, and a gentleman came by and was like, "Hey, can do you guys need help? Can I help you?" And Jimmy had me in a heel hook, and
This is going to be the stupidest thing I say, but is there always a tendency for you, Rich, to flight and for Jimmy to fight because of your athletic backgrounds?
I mean, Rich will meet me head on, but
Okay.
I'm 11 years younger than Rich. So I have a bone to pick, right? Because I'm 11 years younger than Rich, and I have a bone to pick to make up for those 11 years growing up.
Just
So,
a chip that'll never go away on your
well,
shoulder. Got
as
it.
Rich said before this fight started, he goes, "You got a chip on your shoulder." And I looked at him and I go, "I don't have a chip on my shoulder. I have an effing boulder on my shoulder."
Yeah, you better run.
and so as we've gotten older, and I've kind of gotten a little wiser, and I obviously I don't have that chip on my shoulder, at least not with Jimmy. I've gotten better at like trying to zen out and walk away from situations, but he also knows how to push my buttons pretty well. And the last one, he hit a pretty good button, and yeah, next thing you know, we were in the streets just slugging it away at like 7 o'clock on a Wednesday.
Well, and
Incredible.
we are live now, but just to give you a little bit more content, give you a little bit more context so you kind of know where I'm coming from. So I'm 37 right now, and at the time I was probably like 34 maybe. And I had never drank in my life, but during COVID, we started a craft beer podcast with our cousins, and that went for like 2.5 years. And towards the tail end of that, I drank for a month, and this was that end of that month of drinking. And I've never had a drink since that day. That was like, all right, I'm good on alcohol. I never need to do this again. This is not my medicine.
I hear you loud and clear on that.
So, Spencer, before we get rock and rolling here, let everyone know where they can find you, Behavior Performance Institute, everything you got going on, all your socials.
Sure. Yeah, I run a private coaching facility in Dallas. It's called Behavior and Performance Research. The Instagram handle is at bpr.institute, and the website's the same thing. It's bpr.institute. So I made that easy. My personal Instagram handle is just my name, Spencer Nix, no spaces or hyphens. And most of the content we're pushing is on uh, yeah, Instagram and YouTube, and the YouTube channel is the same handle as well, just BPR at Institute or dot Institute.
All right. So in research, Rich shot me a message today and he let me know that your favorite movie is Back to the Future. We have a
Hmm.
commonality there because that is my one of my favorite movies, a bit that and Big Lebowski, but for a while it was just Back to the Future.
I think it's a perfect movie. I I don't think there's anything that if you got a group of world-class directors together that they should change.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's also one of those things for the longest time. If someone would ask you that question, oh, you have to take a movie on a deserted island, what are you going to take? Well, there's three that I can take if I take Back to the Future. So I'm taking all of them.
Now I have three kids and I've introduced Back to the Future to them. And that's one of those that you cross your fingers is like, God, I hope they like this because this is important to me. And I don't typically lie to my kids, but I haven't even told them that there's a second or a third Back to the Future. I've kept that as something they can discover later in life. I personally I'm a big fan of the first one, but
All right.
yeah, not so much the second and third.
I'm
Okay.
right there
So
with you.
if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 41.
All right. So I'm a little bit younger than you, and one of those things like growing up, I probably saw Back to the Future 2 before I saw Back to the Future 1.
Oh,
And I was just always obsessed with the future aspect of that. And then, Back to the Future 1, of course, it's the best. And then I'm a little bit of a hipster. So Back to the Future 3 was always one of those things where everyone hated it. I was like, oh, I love this movie. And so I'm kind of like that.
I do remember when the second one was released, they did like a really great marketing campaign. I remember Pizza Hut had these like badass glasses that you could get that were totally from the movie and like all these, futuristic things to your point that they had like in release. So it was even though I'm not a super big fan of the second one, I remember the release and I remember it being like really cool to your point, just the kind of futurism that it promoted.
I'm still waiting for a hoverboard.
No kidding, man. No kidding.
So Spencer, in that little piece that I sent Jimmy, it mentioned that your love of Back to the Future. It also said that your favorite music is reggae.
I mean, I don't know where you found that, but that's wonderful. I'll tell you the context of that. This month we'll have been running a gym for 16 years, and I've been in strength conditioning for 20. And in those early days, like I'm sure a lot of gym rats, like we listened to heavy music, like a lot of metal, a lot of punk. Um, but when we opened a gym, I had never been there like all day and had the ability to be in control of the music. And I could feel myself after like hours upon hours of listening to that versus like just an hour when you work out, but like constantly listening to that, I had this need, almost like this um desire to compensate for all that stuff. And I think that's what I get made fun of because I like reggae, I like yacht rock. I've gravitated towards all this stuff that feels like not your typical like workout music, but to me, I associate exercise with enjoyment. And so the music I find myself listening to now is very it's considerably lighter than what I, started with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that as well. It can be very, tense and sometimes anxious when you're constantly being bombarded with Slipknot and punk rock and some of those other things. And it's nice to mix it up and have some of that kind of lower, happier vibe going through. And
Hmm.
everything does, we had Dan John on last week, and he said if you need music to pump you up, you're afraid of the bar.
Oh man, I'm a big Dan John fan.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, with your love of reggae, does it stay within the confines of Jamaica, or do you also devil into what Jimmy and I refer to as white reggae? like Revolution and Tribal Seeds and some of that stuff, 30 Heads and Slightly Stupid and that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, I have both arms wide open when it comes to music. And so, I've even gone on diversions to where you have like some of those elements of ska and reggae. Man, I was listening to the Police this morning during a workout, and like even just some of those, like soft incantations and rhythms there. So yeah, I love all that stuff. There's a lot of like random one hit wonders that I can get down with for sure.
Right on. And so if you do so feel inclined after this conversation and you like what you hear from us, we would encourage you to go check out our episode with Roger Steffens, the reggae and Bob Marley historian.
Oh, awesome. I'll do that
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, his Instagram handle is the Family Acid. He was a photographer and he did voiceovers in Hollywood, but he is dubbed as the Bob Marley historian, and he's been involved with the building of the Bob Marley Museum in Jamaica.
Oh, very cool.
So, and we set a record with him. It was his longest podcast that he had ever done, and we had him on for like almost 3 hours.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
So.
so you guys are both into that as well?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But obviously with like a lot of people, it started with Bob Marley and that sort of stuff, and then it's kind of gone all over the place. And Tribal Seeds, Revolution, and Peter Tosh, and you go down the rabbit hole, and it's yeah,
Ayatara.
yep.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, Spencer, like you said before we hopped on, we've talked to a lot of people that you're friends with, and I don't know if that's what got you coming through my algorithm, but you really started catching my eye with your clips, your lighting, noticing that on your podcast on Spotify, you have the video feed. I just went to school for film and television, so I noticed that stuff. I'm a nerd about that stuff, Richard Big Bro. People don't notice that stuff. I pay attention to that stuff. So that's what kind of caught my eye. And then as I started listening to some of the podcasts that you've had with our friends, I saw you were on with Bill and Kay from Motown. That's
Yeah.
where Rich and I got our start with
Oh,
CrossFit.
awesome.
Yeah, we originally went to a level one, and then when we came back, we started looking for like CrossFit gyms, and
Hmm.
that was like the most legit one in New Jersey. It was an hour and a half from where we lived. We decided to go there. Rich decided to move to California and go train out there. I decided to stay there and coach. So I trained with Kay a little bit. So when I saw you pop up there, I really started paying attention to what you got going on. And I really find it interesting because there's this evolution when it comes to CrossFit, especially people who've been in it for a while. You've had a gym for 15 years, and there's this evolution where it's like all in fitness, group fitness, let's build it. And then it's, hey, how do we expand this? How do we get more than just fitness? And when I look into what you got going on, I really find it the fitness is what pulls the people in, but that's not necessarily, I don't want to say that's not what you're about because obviously it's what you're about because it's a gym, but you're about more than that. But I also find it hard to kind of get people to do more than just the fitness, right? So I'm kind of curious to your evolution on what part did you need to start worrying about, the nutrition, the mental scripts I've heard you talk about, the other stuff
Hmm.
besides fitness. Was that right away from your background, or did you kind of notice over time to have a lasting business, you need to kind of worry about some other things?
Well, first of all, thank you for those things you said. That means a lot, especially when you have thoughts and ideas and you put it out there. Most of the time, I just feel like I'm this weirdo that only, thinks these things and nobody is really understanding because maybe I'm not communicating very well. So to hear you say that means an awful lot. But to answer your question, I had some really great experiences later on in life through through fitness specifically, as I think probably a lot of people did. that are now coaching others. Like it was personally impactful to me. And therefore, I wanted to have a similar impact to other people. But when you look at how a lot of gyms are structured, the ability to have that impact is really quite limited. If you're training primarily in a group, if you have a random schedule, your ability to connect with people and your ability to form a relationship with them is very much handcuffed, in my opinion. And so I would say probably like 6 or 7 years ago, this was nothing short of like a real crisis for me. It's like, man, what am I doing? Like, is this the thing? Like, is this the thing that I'm going to be doing? And at that point, I had got, by my own estimation, pretty good at coaching fitness. I had become what I would consider much better than when I started. To put it in context of what you guys have mentioned, I was on level 1, level 2 staff. I had done that for a decade. I had coached hundreds of seminars. And I would say that if you put me next to anybody that was trying to perform this group class coaching thing, I could hit all the points that you wanted me to hit. I could do that. But it didn't feel like I really had any type of stake or claim to that person having a better life. Furthermore, I had a few experiences where I got people really fit and they were still assholes, right? They were categorically in very good shape, but it didn't mean that I had made my mark on society and that this person was leaving the gym as a better person, as we're so often told. And I think the problem is that there was enough of a correlation that we just said, like, hey, get in great shape and man, all that stuff in between the ears, it'll work itself out. And it just got to a point where it's like, hey, I need a better answer than that. Like I need a better map of how to go down this road with folks. And in that agreement with myself, I was aware that like, man, this may only work for me. This way of kind of backing into it where I already had a big testimony of fitness and I had a gym, but I wanted to try to do this other stuff. I knew that that would look pretty messy. But if you fast forward to today, man, I don't think I've figured it all out, but I'm really thankful that I feel like I have some type of system, some type of much broader um, cartography to look at versus just the map of fitness, right? The territory of health is much more broad, and it includes some things like you had mentioned earlier that I believe you have to address, or else you can't really say that you're helping somebody with their health. You can say that you're a great fitness instructor, but that always didn't sit very well with me. I don't think I ever got into this because I wanted to be really good at entertaining people in front of a group. Like I really held this next to like being a physician. But yet when I looked at what I was capable of doing, it didn't feel like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so you hit a couple things there, but I want to go back to the fit asshole because we 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 like to get woo woo over here, like Rich was telling you before we hopped
Right.
on,
Right.
and I always feel like it's a holistic thing, right? So I'm curious to when you saw this fit asshole, for lack of a better term, did you see like a relapse almost where yeah they were able to lose some weight, they were able to get their nutrition down for a little bit, but eventually there was like a relapse because they didn't have the other things in their life kind of balanced out, and it's hard to be a healthy person if you don't have all that stuff balanced out? Or do you find that people are able to lose weight and be fit and still be lopsided in other areas of their life?
It's a great question. One of the things I now believe is that we are a system. We're a system that has all of these different subsystems that have to work together. And so in these particular people that we're talking about, Nutrition was great. Fitness was great. Social relationships are not what I would call any level of depth. Their stress management techniques, as far as their ability to tolerate and decompress, were dysfunctional and on borderline pathological. And I think probably the biggest glaring weakness and what we would say is in limiting supply of like a full, congruent, to use your word, like holistic person is their psychology was totally defunct. How they talked to themselves, the way that they regulated emotion, and even their self-awareness was that of, I would say, an adolescent. Even though you'd look at him physically, you'd be like, man, this guy's got it figured out. He didn't have anything figured out. Well, he had some things figured out, but did that result in 20 years later him relapsing with nutrition or being less than physically fit? I don't know, but I can tell you that it wouldn't surprise me.
I feel like you just identified me. I wouldn't say I'm pathological, would you, Jim?
Not at all. No, but the reason I asked that question is because I've had those moments where my nutrition is on point, but my relationships are horrible and I'm very inward. And then, there's a little bit of a relapse on the nutrition or my fitness being on point, but I have better relationships. So that's why you kind
Yeah.
of caught my eye on that. And one of the podcasts I listened to getting ready for this, you said, and I'm not going to word it correctly, but it's like you have an hour in the gym to get that gym stuff right, but it's the other 23 hours that you can mess up during a day. And I was like, you're talking to me, right? Because it's these people that you talk to where they had, it's an eating disorder, you said, for lack of like, there's an
Mhm.
eating disorder and you might have your nutrition, but you have to look at other things besides, I need to eat this, I need to eat that. There's something a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And you know what? I'll say this, like I also relate to that guy. I think all of us that have been doing this for a long time, we've gotten really good at physical discomfort. We've actually gotten really good at whether it's CrossFit or diversions towards grappling or running or whatever it is. If you got all of us together as a cohort of guys that have been doing exercise for a long time, we would all agree that we're pretty good at doing something physically that compared to the rest of society would be really hard for them. But that's because we built up a tolerance to things like that. What I think we're all agreeing on is when we look at the other parts of our life, it's like, oh, you know what? If I had two things here that I had to choose from, a really gnarly workout or having to work on my relationships, I would choose the gnarly workout 10 out of 10 times, right? If I have to choose like doing some, fitness competition or going out and, training for an ultra or working on how I talk to myself psychologically, I'll do the fitness event every single time.
Let
And
me
so
go
I
get my
think
running
it's
shoes.
I think it's like more guys I talk to that have been doing this for a long time, it's all of our knee jerks because we've built several years uh, growing a tolerance for that. And so now I think it is the time to say like, hey, what's really hard for me right now? My guess is the answer is not, hey, show us how hard you can push on the, echo bike anymore.
So how do we fix that?
Well, I think it is understanding why it's necessary. Because I think for a long time we said, well, wouldn't we just say that if we're physically fit, then it'll bleed over into all these areas of our life? I mean, Mark Ripito, strong people are harder to kill. Like we have all these little quips and quotes to say, like, oh, if you're physically fit, like your life's going to be great. And I think first and foremost is just to address that that's bullshit. It's not true. We can give all these examples where, yeah, this guy was great here. And so it had some type of psychological resilience and carryover here. But we can also give you just as many examples where that's not true. So it's a correlation, but it's not causation. And so one, I think we have to address that this thing that we've been telling ourselves, like, hey, if I'm good here, it'll carry over here. That's not an exact science. And then to believe that, like, if I do work on these things, what would be the end result? And I believe the end result is that you would have a better life. Like, you would be what we would consider more likely to be satisfied in these other areas, that you can't actually separate these things in a way that for most of us we've probably been avoiding or going towards things that we're really quite comfortable with. And so once we recognize that it would be better, then I think that it's addressing and figuring out where we could apply the most leverage, because it can be really overwhelming to start to have this panoramic view and be like, God, man, there is quite a lot that I could do. And so once you can see so many other places where it's like, yeah, I could go there and I could work on that, or it's like, hey, it's right there. The next question is, what's the thing that if you focused on it, it would have the biggest amount of leverage across every aspect of your life? And that answer is potentially going to be different for everyone. But with a little bit of assessment, with a little bit of Q&A, I don't think it's actually that hard to find. I think it probably lives in like the subconscious or unconscious rather regions of our brain. But with a little bit of smart questioning and a little bit of active listening, I think everybody probably has that like right below the surface. Just like we've all identified. It's like, hey, as we're talking, I kind of know what that is for me. It's not really that big of a mystery where I suck the most. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. You said the two choices, right? Something really hard, physical, or going after that relationship or bettering your self-talk. And I also find that yes, I try to avoid those things, but I also find because I've chased some of the physical and because of the physical endeavors and some of my accomplishments, that I am able to take those skills that I took towards those endeavors and start, and I haven't perfected it at all, but start to use those to those personal endeavors, or whether it be education or anything like that. I know because I've succeeded over here with some things that I can do that over here. And I'm really curious to how you kind of go about this in the gym, in the private coaching business, how someone comes to you, hey man, I want to get fit. I want to look good naked. And then you're, hey man, let's script out how you talk to yourself. Well,
Yeah.
how do you incorporate that? When you started throwing that into the business, was there like a bunch of people that just fled? Like, hey, dude, I signed up to do wall balls. I don't want to worry about how I talk to myself.
Well, it's a process. And one, I'm admittedly not great at small talk. And so I've had lots of people coach me. It's like, hey man, you can't you can't right off the bat ask them what their biggest struggle is. It's like, hey, how's your relationship with your wife? You have to earn somebody's trust before you can start to have those conversations. And we found that everyone operates on um, a different level, meaning that, and there's some people that are also really ready to engage in topics like that. People that have quite possibly had a counselor before, have had other coaches before, have had these relationships where someone's in a position to guide them through something. They can lock into what it is that we're trying to do and be like, okay, I got it. I see what you're doing here. But there's a couple of things that we found help quite a bit. And one is just make people aware that this is where we could go if they wanted to. We like to say that we'll go as deep as somebody wants to, but we're not going to go any deeper than than they will. I'm not going to be here holding my breath when they're just like splashing around in the shallow end. So one, I think it's making them aware. that, hey, these conversations around psychology, these conversations around mindset, these conversations around stress management, we're open to it. And then secondly, and I think this lands really well, we're not claiming to be an expert here. When you claim to be an expert, what you're saying is they're coming to you, they need to shut up. You're gonna write stuff on the whiteboard. You're gonna tell them what they should do, and we remind them that we're not going to do any of that. We're going to ask them some really good questions. We're going to try to evoke the wisdom that they have on themselves, and they are the only expert on themselves that is on this planet. And so it would be in their best interest to really think hard about these things that we're asking. And even once we identify some things like, hey, after this conversation, this is something that it appears like from the answers you gave me that we could work on. We'll say, is this something that you want to work on? And people often will say, yeah, I'm terrified of that, but yeah, let's get into it. Let's see what happens. And then there's a lot of people that say, you know what? I appreciate you asking. I think now where I'd like to have the focus is on this. And we say, copy that, right? So if somebody's coming in, yeah, obviously the actions that we're taking revolve around this regular cadence of physical fitness. And the low hanging fruit is like, hey, if we're going to focus on fitness, let's focus on how we're sleeping and let's focus on what we're eating. And then what's nice is that because that's so palatable and it's understood that those are conversations that we can have, it's not as difficult as you would think to say, well, what are your beliefs about sleep? Why do you think you need to stay up and do these things that you're doing, which opens the door to stress management, and that opens the door to psychology, and opens the door to some of these things that as fitness coaches we're like, oh shit, man, I don't want to talk about that. But once you have this mental map of where you could potentially go and how things connect, it's not quite as hard as at least I built it up to be. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah. And once you have someone who's ready to get out of the kiddie pool and dive into the deep end, what does that look like? Is that they're coming in one-on-one fitness training and you're talking to them during their sets, or are you scheduling private time to have them come in and dabble in those other pools?
Gotcha. Yeah. So for us, some of the steps that people go through is before we sell them anything, we meet with them in person and we say, this is where we're headed. Do you want to work together? And a lot of times they're like, no, man, I don't want anything to do with that, right? So it's from the get-go, before we even get into any type of sale, before we get into any type of financial interaction, it's just like, hey, could you see us working together one-on-one, me as a coach, you as a client? And could you see us potentially long-term getting into some of these things? Yes or no? The answer is yes. We don't sell them a membership. We go through a 3-hour assessment. Now that's broken up into 1 hour increments at a time. But over those 3 hours, we're asking basically 20 questions. It's across 6 areas of health: performance, psychology, their social relationships, stress, sleep, and nutrition. And so there's enough data that at the end of that assessment, we say, just like I was saying previously, hey, these are some of the things that we discovered. Where would you like to spend some time as we move forward? As we look at an ongoing membership, how frequently would you like to get together mano a mano? And so we think of coaching the same way that we would think of any other professional service. If you go to a counselor, you don't say, hey, I'd like to talk about my disordered eating, but let's not get into my family at all. You're open for whatever it is, and what you are paying for is the regular cadence that you will interact with that professional. So we have people that say, hey, I'd love to meet with you twice a week because they have some big things and a timeline that's very important to them. And then we have some people say, you know what, probably once a quarter sounds great. Or, you know what, you guys program every 8 weeks. So why don't we get into a regular routine, because my focus really is on performance. And so we start with a one-on-one relationship. We establish why they need that relationship, but they're in the driver's seat as far as the frequency and more or less what it is that they want to focus on.
Spencer, I'm curious, out of purely selfishness here, could you go a little bit more into like the personal relationship stuff a little bit? What that looks like?
Yeah, in what regard? Like just how we go about that, or
I mean, I guess from like the introductory part, some of like those questions and what you're trying to get out of those questions.
yeah, well, from so as far as the assessment goes, like the performance questions are objective data, right? I mean, it's the stuff that you guys probably have a lot of experience with as well, where it's like, hey, what are the things that we want to test them on, where we could come away knowing like, hey, how do their joints move? How do they handle things that have a really extreme gas exchange? Do they have prerequisite strength? All that stuff aside, the rest of the stuff, which is relatively novel, is asking more or less subjective questions, the same way that psychologists do, using things like a Likert scale. Hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself on this? There's initial questions that if they respond, and they respond in a way that, for lack of a better term, is like a red flag, that gives us permission to ask a few follow-up questions. So I'll give you an example. Hey, how much protein in terms of grams are you getting each day? If they're like, huh? We'll be like, well, like how many grams of protein? You know what a protein is? Or we're like, what? Then like, okay, this is an area that as we figure out where everything else lands, this is an area that we could potentially focus on. In contrast, so it'd be like, hey, how many grams of protein you get? It'd be like, hey, I eat 4 times a day. I weigh 200 pounds. And so I'm getting 50 grams of protein for those 4 meals. We know, hey, this isn't an issue for this guy. He's dialed in that regard. And so even though that's not a really deep level of inquiry, we know that it's good enough that we can move on and figure out where the red flags might be. And I'll tell you this, fellas, everybody gets to smoke. I've never done this and somebody arrive at the finish line and be like, I'm green lights all over. Everybody's got something by their own admission. It's like, yeah, I could totally work on that. And so our role as a coach is to handle that like very delicately. And all the while, we want them to know that we are consistently showing up for them. We are empathetic to where they are. We're giving them zero judgment for the honest answers that they have. And once again, we're not pushing any type of campaign or protocol. They're the ones that are in charge. And so, if I could sum that up, by the end of this assessment, we want them to think that we are the ultimate riding shotgun companion. And we want them to think, this is my guy right here. Like, let's go forward. This is somebody I can trust. He's shown me now for 3 hours. And then we typically have some personalized sessions where we start to combine a little bit of these behavioral aspects that we talked about, and we show them how we might coach them through it, along with like an obvious huge emphasis on performance. So both of those things can help our cause quite a bit.
And is this something that all of your coaches on staff are doing?
Yeah, we have 6 going on 7 full-time guys. It's all they do. And
Congratulations, by the way. That's
oh,
huge.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm so proud of it. I mean, these guys are of all the things we have going on, like what I'm the most proud of that, because I mean, 6 years ago, and we all kind of got together and it's like, man, should we do this? I mean, there was a lot of hesitation. There was a lot of reservation. There was a lot of like, hey, this is outside of our scope. This doesn't make sense. Why would we do this? And all those guys are still here. All those guys can dabble in these conversations that we're having. And I'm super proud of them and really honored to work with them.
Spencer, I'm interested. You said when you're talking to people and you're getting all this information, you don't judge. And I know I'm asking for a 20 to 15 year journey of how you don't do that. But how do you not do that? Because I have a hard time looking at someone and not judge them. So I'm curious how you kind of show
Mm.
up as an open vessel for someone and help them because I feel like that's where we empower people.
Mm. Yeah, great question. I think the transition from being a fitness expert to a guide on this journey of health is to one acknowledge that I also have got the smoke. I'm sitting right there on the hospital bed right next to him. I'm not in this ivory tower, which, if we could be honest, there were times in fitness that I felt that way. There were times where I did feel physically superior to a lot of the people that I was coaching, if I could just be really transparent. And I had worked so hard to get so much better that it was very easy for me to look down my nose upon people that came in overweight, that came in and had the appearance that they had just let themselves go. In this paradigm shift, because I have things that are in limited supply, because I have red flags that I'm currently working on myself, it's so much easier to see that person in a different light. In fitness, we have this myopic scope where we're focused on, we think it's a lot, but really it's just a handful of things that we care about. And so it's very easy to judge someone and say, like, man, you could just get your act together. But that person is probably a badass in lots of areas in their life, the same way that we're more or less like badasses in fitness. I've coached some people where you find out it's like, man, they're so sharp in these other areas of their life that they make me look like a punk. And so if the roles were reversed, they could look down their nose upon me at the thing that I'm not really great at. And so I think when you expand that perspective, you realize, like, hey, first impressions are always inaccurate. Right? I mean, they
Yeah.
always are. It's like, God, when has that ever been true? It's like, yeah, this guy's exactly what I thought. It's like, no, everybody has something that like you have to discover. And so I think if you can go into it with that set of eyes, when you can recognize, like, hey, I'm really, I'm really nothing to write home about either. It's such a, it's such a refreshing approach. I would get so anxious going into a coaching session before, thinking that I had to know all the answers. Right? It's like, oh man, this guy's coming to me for grappling. Better, I better know all the leg locks, right? This guy's coming in for track and field. I better know everything there is to know about this because he's expecting that of me. But if we're not claiming that, then it's like we don't even have to appear like we have it figured out, which is so nice.
I appreciate that outlook on things. I don't know how many times growing up in sports and almost looking down on the kids that took their education serious and didn't take their sports serious as I did. And
Man.
then
Mm.
20 years later, I'm back in school and I'm kind of in the reverse of that where I have to like look at it from, oh, maybe if I took my education serious 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been in this position. So I really appreciate that of just kind of taking the glasses off and seeing things for what they are at times. So I appreciate that outlook. And I want to I could talk to you all day about behavior and performance research and what you got going on. We want to be super respectful of your time. We do have 4 questions we ask our guests at the end of every podcast, but I do want to ask you one thing if Rich doesn't have anything else for you. I do want to ask you, you said you were a redshirt level 1, level 2 for a bunch of years. Kind of curious to what that whole experience was like, because that was something Rich and I always looked at. We looked at those people when we went to our level ones in those seminars. Rich worked on the CrossFit endurance staff for a little bit, so that was always something when we were in that CrossFit life where we always kind of looked at those people like that was kind of where we wanted to go. And then kind of a couple of years ago, CrossFit got turned upside down on its head, and it's way
Mhm.
different than what it looked like. So I'm kind of curious what that experience was like and what your thoughts are on the current climate of CrossFit.
Man, I was with Matt and Cherie just a couple weeks ago. We got to do some backcountry skiing together, and that got brought up. And it got brought up with such reverence for all three of us because none of us are working for CrossFit anymore. It's been many moons since any of us did any seminars, but there it was such a special thing that we agreed that we got to do in the early days. Because this would have been 2009 that I started. You would be so excited to see the email come through because it would tell you who you got to work with. And so, all those people you mentioned, like if I saw Adrian on there, if I saw Pat Barber, if I saw the Chance, if I saw Chris Speedo, if I saw all these guys, it's like, oh man, it's gonna be a great weekend. Just because you get to learn from them, you get to, inevitably have some shenanigans that happen during a workout, or there would be eating contests and binge drinking and all kinds of stuff in the early days. I mean, it was the Wild West, and that was such a novel and exciting part that I look back and I really hold that with great reverence. As far as being in that role, I felt the same way that you just described. Like it was so impactful to me. It was like, man, I would really to do that. And what I'm so thankful for, and this is the thing that we all agreed upon, is like with very little preparation, I can riff, right? I can get up and talk in front of a group. And it's because for so many of those lectures, like you kind of had to show up like you knew what you were doing, even though you didn't really know what you were doing, right? And there were so many things that I was able to develop that aren't really even specific to fitness, but presenting, dealing with people one on one, which inevitably you had to do, how to field questions, all these things. I'm in short, I'm super thankful for that experience. For me, I never was doing it because I needed that as a job. I knew I was never going to make the transition where I was doing that full time and I was going to turn my back on the gym and my crew. And so my experience was a little different than others, meaning that I never worked every single weekend. And so I was never doing it for a paycheck. When it and I think this is inevitable and probably every business has to go through this when it got really organized and structured and when the personality left and then even when some of my boys stopped doing it, it took the fun away from me. And I'll give you an example. You can speak in public and you can be aware of your audience and you can know as you're talking, it's this weird kind of out of body experience. You're like, I'm doing good, right? It's like their body language is telling you, like, yeah, man, like this is good. I finished the lecture. I had a lady come to me crying. I'm just being honest with you, crying, saying that the things that I said and the examples I used changed her life. And she would never be the same. That's a direct quote. I'm just repeating what she told me. I then went in and was scolded because I went over by 5 minutes on the allotted time that we had for that lecture. And it was at that point, it's like, okay, like I get where this is going. I think the train has left me at the station. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And, it got to a point where it's like, okay, I'm doing less and less. And it just made, just like you guys said, like as things were changing, man, it was a wonderful time for me to gracefully exit from that with nothing but love and appreciation and a lot of truly a lot of loyalty to those people in that experience.
We say
Now
this
you want
with, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry,
no, I
Spencer.
was just going to say I don't know if I answered that well enough. I'm happy to talk about CrossFit and give my opinion there, but yeah, that was specifically just about seminars.
Yeah. We often say with people, especially red shirts and a couple people we know in the jiu-jitsu community, um, you never meet a stranger.
Mm,
And so sitting here having this conversation with you, sometimes we have conversations with people and we get off and we're like, but more often than not, when we get off with people in the fitness community, we're like ready to high five each other and go
yeah.
do something. And so it's the same thing speaking with you. Like it seems like, I don't know if that's that type of personality gets drawn into those sorts of roles or being seeking and getting into those roles and working
Mm,
around those people brings out that sort of charisma and that personality and the ability
mm,
to talk to anyone. So
yeah.
you got it for sure, and it's fun talking with you. And I've got a couple quick ones for you. I'm curious, are you a lifelong Texan?
I am. I
You are.
am. Yeah, I live in Dallas and I was raised not 50 miles from here in a much smaller town.
Okay. Was it like Dazed and Confused when you grew up?
Oh man, what a great reference. There were parts that felt very similar to that. I mean, I told you guys how old I am, but I tell my kids, it's like, yeah, we had like shotguns on display in the extended part of our pickup trucks, and we would go and do things that you could never do today. As far as like being able to have access to country land and be able to shoot guns and do things that just felt like in relation to Dazed and Confused you couldn't get away with today.
You miss it?
You know, I don't, man.
Okay.
I don't. I'm thankful for it. I wouldn't change anything about it, but I'm so thankful for where we're at right now. Like I'd love to go high five that kid, but I don't want to be that kid.
Right on. Right on. I'm curious. I think I heard correctly in doing some research and stuff. Are you dabbling a little bit more in like the endurance side of things these days?
Man, I would never claim to ever be an endurance athlete, but I have found myself gravitating towards things philosophically that do require a very patient experience with discomfort. And I think that mimics life. I think when I was 22, like I wanted things hard and fast and short. And as I get older and my perspective of what life is and how there is a constant amount of challenges, I do find myself gravitating towards things that are longer in duration. Definitely the way I train, but I mentioned I've gotten into backcountry skiing and some cross country mountain bike stuff. Haven't got into the running stuff yet, but the backyard ultra is very enticing to me. Just the format of the structures and the way that the intervals work. Um, so I'd never claim to be ever good at that stuff, but it is something that I do find myself like wanting more and more of, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you see a Leadville 100 mountain bike in your future?
Man, I've trained a couple of guys for that. I have some good friends doing it this year. I'm not opposed to it. I've been out there and I've done some other races, and I find myself really liking some of the technical aspects of mountain biking. And even though there's absolutely some technical parts of Leadville, if you've been out there, I mean, it's a lot of fire roads and it's a lot of, pretty, there's, you need to have, spaces where multiple people can travel. And so to me feels very different than a lot of the single track stuff that I really like. So I think there's a rite of passage there, and I can see myself like acknowledging that I need to go through that rite of passage. But I think if it's just for fun, there's a lot of other races that I'm interested in doing it. And even outside of racing, just like riding. I just like it makes you feel like a kid again. You know what I mean?
I hear you. So just a little low key flex for you here, Spencer. I'm a 3-time top 20 Leadville 100 run finisher.
Holy smokes, man. I did not know that. Thank you for flexing. That means a lot.
And we lived there
Golly.
for a year, so we do
Oh,
know the terrain of
yeah.
Leadville pretty well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I spent 4 summers there, and we lived there for a year full time. And I have a seventh, a 14th, and a 16th under my belt, all big
Oh,
buckles.
man. Oh, man. Uh, Lots of respect for that. That's incredible.
And
So much respect.
the backyard ultra is very intriguing. I did a 50K in that sort of format where you did a
Uh-huh.
2.6 mile loop every 45 minutes this summer,
Yeah.
and it's gnarly.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
it
gnarly.
looks it. And it's like I'm thinking very, very entry level. It's like, hey, what a great format for me to even just see how far I could get. Not ever claiming that it would be competitive, like in my mind, it's like, God, could I even do like a marathon? Could I even do something, past the basics? But to have like the last man standing or something, like I assume that you did is really impressive.
Yeah, it's that was difficult, and I've also found the timed events versus just running for a set distance is a different kind of mental
Yeah.
aspect.
And Jimmy, I don't know, you had mentioned grappling. So I don't know if this carries over, but low key have been very much in the love affair with jiu-jitsu for the last, well, it's been almost 8 years exactly, because I did it when my second daughter was born. So some of the stuff you said, I was like, I wonder if he's into that, or if it's more um, grappling based or wrestling based. But
Go ahead, tell him, Jim.
Well, I didn't know if he had a statement to finish, but I saw when I was doing research, I saw you raw. So I'm wanted to get into that. And so in a past life, I will say, so grew up wrestling and then had a period where I was just hanging out in wrestling clubs, hanging out in jiu-jitsu clubs, and then I decided if I didn't go out to California and give it a go, I was gonna regret it for the rest of my life. So I went out to California for 2.5 years. I trained at 10th Planet Oceanside with Gio Martinez and lost my knee. So
mm,
uh then I moved to Colorado with Rich, so I haven't rolled since 2017. It's funny because I always used to say to people, I don't trust myself if I don't roll, and I haven't rolled since 2017. So you being knowing what you do with people and athletes, you kind of know what I'm talking about there.
oh man, I know exactly what you're talking about. You guys are studs, man. It's so cool to hear what you guys have done and pursued. And I think the most impressive thing is just to go all into something, right? It's like, hey, move to California, move to Colorado, like immerse myself in that, and that speaks highly of you. But yeah, it hasn't been lost on me that you stopped jujitsu in 2017, and then just a couple of years later, uh, got into crafting your own beer.
No, it wasn't craft and beer. We were doing a
Oh,
craft beer podcast.
So we were like,
okay,
we were
okay,
doing
okay.
reviews and stuff. And
Oh,
uh,
okay, gotcha.
what happened was myself and my two cousins, we kind of had like a text message exchange where we would share craft beers and stuff. And then that was going on for like about a year and a half. And then the world shut down and we were sitting around twiddling our thumbs, and we had already had the other podcast going. And it was like, why don't we just have a happy hour one day? And so we had a happy hour. We're like, we're going to record this and see what happens. And so we recorded it. And then the next thing you know, we had 2.5 years worth of episodes. And we ended up having like
Wow,
probably like 20 different brewers on from around the country. And,
so cool.
but now Jimmy's drinking career only lasted a month, and
Short-lived.
I don't drink anymore either.
Strictly hop waters at this point in my life. Spencer, I'm curious to where you train, jiu-jitsu wise.
There's a place here in town. It's called Octagon MMA. This place has been around as long as we have, and um, sadly, the guy that I was brought up under passed away about 8 months ago, and so they're in the transition of finding a new instructor. But I've been there, and then I'm sure you can relate. It's like as you get above like the brand new beginner level, I've found friends at other gyms, and we have mats in the garage, and I have friends that have mats in their garage, and so it's a combination of instruction and then just lots of practice. And I love the maybe it's because I own a gym, but I love the social aspect of it too. I find it really really good for me, and like you touched on, like healthy in a way. I don't know what I did before jujitsu, but just as you described, like I can tell when it's been too long since I've done that, and there's like almost some I, I think it's emotional things that I can work out in close concert with someone else, and especially in like that little social circle that I find really really healthy in ways that I would have never suspected when I first got into it.
There's something about someone trying to choke you or break your leg that when you get done afterwards, it's almost like hitting a joint. It's like that kind of exhale, and it's almost I don't want to get all Joe Rogan about it because he kind of fanboys out sometimes, but he does have some solid points there. I feel just kind of like that relief and kind of like things aren't as hard, right? And like don't get me wrong, I can get there with a kettlebell, I can get there with a barbell, I can even get there on a slow long walk breathing, but there's
Hmm.
something about jujitsu where you have no choice about it, and when you're rolling with people that are really good, it doesn't go so much about I'm trying to like get this, I'm trying to get this. It's like I'm just trying to focus on my breathing and survive. And that
Hmm.
almost kind of brings you into that awareness that I've spent 10 years trying to find on a meditation cushion.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard it said it's the most dynamic form of meditation, which yeah, I'm not wrong.
No, no. So, Spencer, we have 4 questions we ask all our guests at the end of every
Go.
podcast. First one I got for you. Are you a coffee drinker?
Yes.
How do you brew your coffee and how do you take it?
I have the great fortune of having a pretty fancy machine here at the house and at the gym. Here at the house, it's a Jura espresso machine. At the gym, it's a Miele, which is like a German brand. That sounds so snooty, but I love coffee. I love it black. I love it very simple and basic. And when I'm out on the road, I love a good AeroPress if I'm traveling.
You can get down with the Airey Bros any day of the week. We get snooty with our
Yeah.
coffee.
You have a favorite roaster in your area?
Um, Locally, there's some guys from Australia that run a handful of shops here, and it's called LDU, and it's fantastic. And then in Austin, there's a brand called Coup, and they have an El Salvador bean that I could have every day for the rest of my life, and I love it.
All right. One more Airy Bros pro tip for you. Have you ever heard of third wave water?
Water? No.
Okay,
Uh-uh.
so the gentleman we had on, this is another episode you might want to check out with Charles Nick. He is the founder and creator of Third Wave Water. He was actually worked for NASA, and
Oh,
he
amazing.
loved coffee, had a favorite roaster, and I believe it was Cincinnati. And he could just never figure out why he could never brew his coffee to taste the same way they brewed it at the coffee shop. Went in, had a conversation with the head guy, the owner, and he's like, "Oh, well, we filter our water. We have this special, there's like a
Mm,
special mineral profile that's like the World Barista Federation or whatever it is, that this is the mineral profile that we have to give it that taste." So being the NASA scientist that he was, he developed, what he did was he took that water profile, he dehydrated the water profile so that it just has the minerals. And then what they do is they sell those minerals in like little, like kind of like element packets, and you put one of those packets into a gallon of distilled water, and then that's the water that you use to brew your coffee. So it has that specific mineral blend that brings out all those toffee and dark cherries or tobacco, whatever, whatever the bag says that the hints of might be. So it's that
hmm
mineral profile that brings it out. So if you really want to kick it up a notch with those fancy espresso machines you got, check out Third Wave Water.
Dude, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense because when you have shitty water, I mean, I'll drink a shitty cup of coffee too, but yeah, I mean, you can
Yeah.
tell the difference for sure. Wow.
Spencer, do you have a daily practice or ritual that you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of Spencer Nix?
I think there's a few ways that I could answer that question. The one that was very salient in my mind is reading. I love to read. I love to learn that as a regular daily cadence. I can tell a big difference when it's not there. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like I'm reading textbooks or dorking out on something. It could just be for fun, but that to me feels like the way that I allow my brain to think and try to be creative. And so if there was one thing that if you took away from me, I'd be like, man, that's I'm really at a loss for what to do instead of that. I would probably look to that.
Is that a like start your day practice or something to wind down with, or just whenever you have the time?
Yes.
Okay.
uh, there's one morning I'm coaching super early still, and so I'll crack open something for just a few minutes. The other days, I'll try to get up early just so I have more time to just get swept away in whatever I'm reading. And then I usually instead of we don't have any electronics in the bedroom, so I usually grab something and take it with me and finish the day. So yeah, it's like a almost like a nice little bookshelf for my day.
Awesome.
Spencer, what are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? You reading anything?
Bro, let's
Mhm.
see here. Let's see. Trying to teach myself how to my kids are learning to play the piano, and so I've been very interested in um a lot of music that has that as the basic structure and backbone. Um, I like I like jazz, and so I've been digging into some greats as far as jazz piano is concerned. So a Bill Evans, um, Thelonious Monk, and even some guys along those lines that aren't quite as popular. Um, from a podcast standpoint, I don't read a lot of fiction, but I picked up this book called Gentleman from Moscow. Have you ever heard of this book?
No.
I never heard of it either. It's I guess you'd call it like historical fiction. It's at the time period that the Bolsheviks were in power, and so it's like the first group of people that tried to implement communism. It's fascinating. It's really interesting. And so I had some podcasts that are on the docket. One that's called the Anti-Humans, and it's the most extensive study on like Soviet atrocities that I've ever heard. So it's a little dark, but it's fascinating, and I've always been interested in like uh, the depravity of man and like how I think I'm a good person, but I'm still just like a couple of decisions away from completely ruining my life. And so like that narrative is always something that I'm like really interested in. It's like, hey, these guys had great intentions, but yet, I mean, they completely destroyed millions of people's lives. So yeah, that and was there so music check, podcast check,
What are you reading right
books.
now? While we're at
Um, let's see. There's happen to be right here. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Alan Day Baton. He's got a business called the School of Life. He's got such a great way with words. This book's called A Therapeutic Journey, and it's really good. Like you'll read some stuff and be like, God bless. I wish that I had a good enough command of the English language to say something the way that he said it. Let's see. A friend of mine that did our branding recommended Slow Productivity by Cal. I'm sure it's backwards on the screen. It's pointless to even raise it up. Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. And then Donald Miller, who's written some great books, just released one called Coach Builder.
you
So I
like
got
that one?
those, and then I just kind of like skimmed through it, and there's a couple of things where it's like, yeah, okay. I realized after I got it that it's more or less like coaching people in business, and so there's some stuff that I think I was so excited that he just had a book called Coach Builder. I didn't realize that maybe not everything was completely Apple with me. Have you guys read that one?
I haven't read that one, but he has a book on kind of branding your brand and how to
Yeah,
create a story behind it. And
yeah.
I did a book report on that last year to
Oh, cool. Yeah,
kind of help what we got going on and how to create our story behind our brand.
yeah. I think this, yeah, Story Brand, Here on a Mission is fantastic. Business Made Simple, those are all great. And then I'm even a big fan of his old school ones like Blue Like Jazz and some of the ones that were more uh like contemporary like Christian books. I thought he did a really good job with.
Spencer, I'm curious, are you the type of guy who will read one book at a time, or like you showed us those three books, are you diving into multiple books at a time?
Man, for a long time, I would the type A part of me is like I'd open this book, and even if I, freaking hated it, I would just keep reading. It was like a book report. And then there was a guy I heard say that he reads books like he reads blogs. It's like, hey, as soon as I get uninterested in something, I'll just put it down. So that completely changed the way that I approach stuff. And I just gave myself permission that if I wasn't interested in something, I would just pick something else up. So yeah, I'll usually have, I'll just buying books is the one thing I don't have a budget with. My wife makes fun of me. It was like, oh, cool, you got another book. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, I don't spend money on much of anything. So it feels a little obnoxious to have a few things that you're chipping away with, but it's so nice to be able to pivot and, read this or that and not feel like I have to, do a book report on it or even read it straight through. The Cal Newport thing. It's like, yeah, there's a chapter in here I'm not going to read because I just don't find it interesting at all.
Yeah. I think Tim Ferriss is big on that too, where it's okay to not finish something if you're disinterested in it or it doesn't resonate with you. It's okay to put it down.
Well, that makes sense because the guy I'm thinking of, his name's Naval Ravikant, and I think they're in cahoots, like him and Tim
Yeah.
Ferriss. So they probably they
Maybe
probably
Tim
came up with
took
that
that from him.
together, huh? Yeah, yeah.
Spencer, last but certainly not least, we got for you here. Do you have a guilty pleasure or guilty pleasures? It could be, food related. Maybe you got a favorite donut shop. Maybe you have a favorite craft beer. We talked a lot about music. Maybe you're a closet Swiftie.
Well, I came out in the gate saying that I do love some yacht rock. Guilty pleasures. I do love food quite a bit. I'm obsessed with making the perfect hamburger, and so in my crusade in my pilgrimage, I obviously got to taste a lot of hamburgers. I gotta refine this palate. So hamburgers are a guilty pleasure. And then I was turned on. My sister spent a lot of time in France, and she turned me on to what's called a Queen Aman. Do you know this French pastry?
Mm-mm.
Oh.
Guys, guys. It's probably best that you don't try it because once you do, you never be the same. It's like a croissant, but it's somehow caramelized with honey and they shape it just right and it's got just the right amount of air in there and you can take a bite and be like, man, what was my life before this? I don't even know. I don't even know. Are the trees brighter? Is the sun shining more? I don't know. So yeah, Queen Aman's and hamburgers. I think that's amongst probably a few others the guilty pleasure for sure.
All right. All right. So I'm curious, being born and raised and spending your adult existence in and around Dallas, you're just a few short miles from on Route 35 from Oklahoma. Have you ever had an onion burger?
You know what? Somebody was just telling me about this. Is this where the instead of the bread, it's an onion that's the outside of it?
I mean, they might do something like that, but so the onion burger originated in Oklahoma back during the Depression era when, meat was expensive and they had to, doing it sparingly. So what they did was is they overloaded on fried onions, and then that became so Oklahoma is known for the onion burger. And basically what it is, it's a smash burger on onions.
Well, I think they're on the right track for sure.
Yeah.
Smash burger, 1,000%. The bun's really important. I think onions have a place in the burger as well. Oklahoma, they're on the right track.
Do you have a In and Out down near you?
We do. Yeah. Yeah. A few years ago, they started popping up down here.
So is it In and Out, Whataburger, or Five Guys for you?
Well, I mean, what kind of Texan would I be if I didn't say Waterburger?
True, true.
Waterburger has a very nostalgic taste for me. I can take a bite of an A1 thick and hearty, and I'm immediately transported back in time to a certain place and era in my life. So
Back in the pickup truck with the gun rack, huh?
that's right. That's right. That's right. Right back there. Well, it's 1 a.m.
All right, all right, all right.
Party at the Moon Town, Moon Tower. Spencer, thank you for taking a risk on the Airey bros.
I
Thank you for
appreciate it.
showing up sight unseen and rolling the dice with us. We've really enjoyed this conversation and everything you brought to it.
Worth a gamble. Thank you, fellas, for having me.
Yeah, anytime, Spencer, is an honor and a pleasure to chat with you and pick your brain. I might be hitting you up at some point to work on some of those interpersonal skills because I'm really
Love
good
that.
at suffering, but I'll sign up for a 100-mile race before I have a difficult conversation with someone.
I think what you just said is probably, maybe not to the extent of the endurance capacity, but everybody's on that same wavelength, I imagine.
All right. Spencer, thanks for your time tonight. You have a wonderful evening and yeah, keep doing what you're doing, man. You're killing it.
Fellas, thanks so much, man. It's like I've known you guys for years. Thanks so much for having me. I very much recognize that it was a one-sided conversation as y'all were drilling me questions. So if at some point you guys would be up for having a conversation for our podcast, I'd love that. I'd be honored to.
Yeah.
Love to love to just drill you with questions and just sit back and just listen to y'all flow. You guys got some cool stuff you got going on, cool experiences, and yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. We love it. Be honored.
It would be an honor and keep on cranking out your content, man. I love it. I love it. When we have a podcast guest and I can dive into what they're putting out and just be like, oh man, this is gonna be a great conversation. Like Rich and I were talking yesterday, like we don't gotta worry, this is gonna roll. Like, we know we're gonna be able to just kind of go in here and have a conversation, like Rich said, like we've known you and didn't disappoint.
Well, awesome, man. I hope I did a good job for you guys.